Hello and welcome to the Ed3 Podcast. This is Scott Meyer, and it is a true privilege to welcome the credentialed dancer, throwing backpacks to the disco floor, ensuring privacy and ownership for learners everywhere. This bulldog is the co-founder and CEO of Disco.xyz. She's building the future of identity. She's gathering the few, the proud, the boys club, and she's always shining the spotlight on the rock stars of the WC3. This Disconaut speaks and slays at conferences and podcasts everywhere. You may have heard her pierce the heart of soulbound tokens recently in a debate with founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin. She's direct from the Big Apple, the greatest Evan since Almighty. Your friend and mine, it's Evin McMullen. Welcome.
GM, everybody. An absolute pleasure to be here with you today.
So great to have you. And I love your work because I really see you reimagining what credentials mean, what credentials are. And you talk so deeply about this. So maybe to kick us off and set the context, tell us a little bit about what a verifiable credential is for and how it might reimagine what a credential is.
So a verifiable credential is just a data type, a file type, like a PDF or an NFT, a way for us to encompass a piece of information, package it up, and carry it around with us from one context to another. So verifiable credentials are statements written by one party about another or about itself sometimes that are signed by the keys that represent that entity. So this statement is almost kind of like a diploma where it's written about an individual and signed by that university, then given to the person it's written about, that learner or student who's achieved it. Then they're able to carry it with them to bring that credential, that proof of achievement with them to various different contexts, personal, professional, residential, wherever. And so we can think of verifiable credentials like the digital form of the plastic cards and achievements that we might carry around with ourselves, in addition to diplomas, things like driver's licenses, KYC credentials, proofs of residency, proofs of membership in an organization, even things like your light or dark mode preference for apps, your zodiac sign, or your favorite color. So then you are able to carry these proofs with you and present them to a variety of different contexts. You can present them to physical spaces to enter things like a party. You could present your credentials to an application to customize to your preferences. So setting itself to light or dark mode, setting itself to your primary language, accommodating your preferred pronouns in the text that's presented to you. You can also use a verifiable credential for access control. So in the same way that a lot of on-chain Web3 tokens are used right now, you can use a credential for access control to a chat channel like Discord or Telegram, a collaboration tool like Google Drive or GitHub, an e-commerce experience like Shopify to access discounts or merchandise, or even a smart contract to access privileges on-chain, such as gated minting of NFTs or a gated DeFi pool that's only for members of a certain community or folks who have certain kinds of credentials or proofs or pieces of information about themselves. So on-chain tokens are public and immutable and transferable, or largely optimized for being transferable. So this means they're accessible to everyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection, basically for all time. And they're really optimized for data that needs to be shared and that we want to be available to everybody all the time, where that relationship with that data, the wallet that it holds, isn't necessarily one that needs to be bound together infinitely. Or at least that's for a majority of use cases that tokens are optimized for. Whereas verifiable credentials are off-chain, and so they're private by default. They're all kind of like notarized or signed by a party's keys, but they don't need to live on the blockchain, even though those keys might come from a chain. So they're revocable or can be set to expire. So they offer a much more flexible data primitive than something that's persistent and public. And our identities as humans are constantly evolving and changing. So we want to have a data primitive that's going to be similarly flexible for what we need to express ourselves. And additionally, verifiable credentials are globally resolvable. And so they can be read by many different kinds of keys, I think over 150 different kinds. So Ethereum keys, Bitcoin keys, email addresses, PGP keys can all pass notes in the shared language of verifiable credentials using this particular spec from the W3C.
Yeah, that's incredible. And, I love, you talk about it with your company Disco as well, how you could bring this into an environment and the environment changes for you based on your preferences, right? And that could be, I attended a conference and now I get access to the after party, or I like dark mode, and when I go to your website, it's going to change to dark mode. How do we get from that concept to that implementation? Because I think the concept is so powerful. and then the reality feels like light years away, right? And I want you to tell me it's going to be around the corner, but how are we going to get there? And what's maybe the thing that'll take it exponentially faster there?
So I think the limiting factor for a long time to be able to explore the capabilities of portable and client-side verifiable data has been that we haven't had anywhere to put that data. We haven't yet had a data backpack or a way to take custody of information written about ourselves such that we might even be able to carry it from one context to another. So the big unlock that I'm really excited about is Disco's data backpacks, or friendly web apps that make it easy to take custody of data written about you using the keys that you already use on chain. But we're looking forward to serving even broader audiences coming next year. But with that newfound capability, we can issue credentials from a whole bunch of different providers, be they institutions, organizations, learning modules, online applications, smart contracts, you name it. And then we've got folks who are now in a position to accept that data, to carry it with them to other apps. And so when we think about what this looks like in the immediate future, the simple answer is API calls. So what I can do today, actually, is I can visit some applications. I can connect my wallet as I would normally with one click. Let's say I'm using MetaMask. And then that application can call the Disco API based on my Ethereum address, is going to be able to access the public parts of my data backpack that I've chosen to share with that app. Then the app can accordingly modify what it serves up to me. Now, that change can be, as you noted, the presentation of the UI. It could also be that app recognizes the credentials in my data backpack as sufficient to prove that I'm not a bot. And so therefore it does not serve me up a CAPTCHA or ask me to pick out the sidewalks from the box of 9 images or whatever it is that we're doing right now. So from Sybil resistance to utility of the credentials themselves, any application can decide to interpret that data any way they would prefer. And so data, of course, can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And we can also choose to present ourselves in very different manners. The versions of ourselves that we're showing up with right now to this conversation are probably a little different than the version that we're going to bring to our holiday dinners with our families, that are different than on stage at a conference. And so we've got a whole variety of different ways to express ourselves. And the nice thing about decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials is that they offer a lot of flexibility in how we can show up.
Yeah, I left my ugly sweater off, so I went with the neutral blue today. So that's good. So tell me, with that context, you had a great, interesting tweet, I would say, this week about how verifiable credentials need a rebrand. So I'm curious what you kind of meant by that, and maybe what features would a new brand bring that would maybe make it more appealing, or maybe would answer some of the things you think are lacking right now with the less sexy name of verifiable credential.
So, I think verifiable credentials as a technical spec are so cool. They're like the coolest data primitive, except for maybe decentralized identifiers, which are like self-custodied link trees, like directions for how to interact with this identifier, kind of directions on your data backpack for other identifiers, messaging and service endpoints, that kind of stuff. But anyway, verifiable credentials, super dope, absolute word salad. The word verifiable and the word credential already mean things in the colloquial world in which we live, and especially in the Web3 world in which we build. And so I often think that the best way to explain verifiable credentials is by providing use cases, telling stories of how we might be able to use these little JSON blobs for tickets or for diplomas or for birthday party invitations. But for all of those different stories, what we're really talking about is a diploma, a birthday party invitation, an object that is skeuomorphic to an experience that we already have.
Right.
And so I would much prefer to refer to credentials as the things that they are, the data they encompass, the action they enable, or capability they permit, versus referring to them by their file type. In fact, when we send documents back and forth, we refer to them as pitch documents, as mock-ups, as t-shirt designs, not as PDFs and TIFFs and JPEGs, although we do love a good JPEG on the blockchain. And so I think, if we liken JSON to verifiable credential, it is a technical term that is very close to the data structure itself, close to the protocol as well. And so if we can help more people understand this concept by placing these tools in user journeys and stories that we're already familiar with, having tickets to go to events, having proofs of attendance for Twitter Spaces, having receipts of purchase or receipts of your contributions, be they non-financial. I think that will be a much easier way to connect with broader audiences and to make the use of this primitive a little bit simpler.
Right. Yeah, and I wonder if that answers a question I often get from people, which is how do you avoid over badging? Especially in academic context, they're worried that we're going to give everyone a ribbon, right? Like if you take one class, you get a badge. Do you think moving away from the idea of credentials solves that? Because in a way, it's not always like you said, it's not always a diploma. It's like this whole spectrum. But I'm curious how you think about we have the ability now to badge more or to credential more along the way, so we have more detailed credentials. I actually know how far you got in the class rather than you just finished the class with an A or whatever. But also too much information at some point becomes overload. So how do you kind of think about that in a world of, infinite zeros and ones as opposed to, a bookshelf where you only have one diploma?
So Scott, I'm going to be a little spicy here.
Yeah,
I don't think over badging exists. I think that we create a profound amount of data going through our daily lives and, certainly working through the achievements of academia, even those as small as homework assignments or individual questions on exams. And that data exhaust, that trail of our actions exists. It's just not captured in any kind of usable form that we can employ as individuals and call upon and reuse in future instances. And so until we have captured the entirety of our data expression in an easily comprehensible form that we can choose to summon at any point, I don't think we reach the limit of what might be considered, too much badging. I think especially in more, traditional higher education settings, partial completion of university coursework is often totally unverifiable, not, something that you can share readily. And I think there is value in being able to prove your partial completion of coursework, because some of that learning is absolutely applicable to your ability to seek jobs or, roles, other higher education opportunities. And so the onus is not on the capture of the data to be scrupulous and limited, but rather, I think the responsibility here is on UX designer products to make that data comprehensible to learners and, data backpack owners everywhere, but also to the relying parties, to the verifying applications and services that seek to read this data and interpret it for their own, internal logic. And so it's up to those folks who rely upon the data to be choosy about what it is that they want to count as valuable, and to decide how they would like that presented, to request that in a form that's going to be easy to share. And it's up to the holders of that data, the owners of those data backpacks, to be in a position to freely collect that which is valuable to them and to selectively disclose it in the places where it's going to make sense for them as well.
Yeah. Can we go a little deeper on that idea of people kind of digesting this as the employer, let's say, because what I see kind of talking to folks in the space is there's a fair bit of tooling, people really excited about creating these credentials, tools like yours will make it really easy to also like give these credentials, which is really cool. But I'm trying to think the other side of the table. I haven't seen, that talent marketplace that filters by verifiable credentials, or I haven't seen that employer that's hiring necessarily based on verifiable credentials yet. So just curious, how do we get from here to there? And maybe are there barriers for those people, or is it just a lack of knowledge, or what do you kind of see as the next step to get the demand built up?
I think you've highlighted one of the great blockers up to this point that have limited the adoption of verifiable off-chain data as means of learning credentials and having sort of a robust demand for those credentials. And so this is sort of a three-sided cold start problem. We need to bring into being concurrently the issuance of verifiable credentials that pertain to relevant achievements from signers that are going to be trusted authorities in those domains. We need an ability for individuals and organizations to take custody of those credentials and carry them to other contexts. And then we need relying parties who have the ability to easily verify and validate the contents of those credentials against a set of expectations, and to feel confident in their ability to rely on that data enough that they don't have to phone home to its source. source. And so what this requires is a pretty intricate system of sort of push and pull among these three parties, plus a whole bunch of other fun bells and whistles and features that would make such machinations easier. And so we talked earlier about how for a long time that wasn't very easy to take custody of these credentials. Now, I think we need to also contemplate how it's challenging to define what interoperability looks like when we don't have a central authority telling us who is who sits behind each of these sets of keys. What exactly are the fields that pertain to something like a diploma? So I think we're really fortunate to be in a very community-driven standards environment where we've got folks like working groups at the W3C that are defining schema libraries that will have sort of recommended allow lists or preferred signers for things like self-governed schemas. I also think that being able to have a really simple developer experience that clearly shows the full life cycle of a credential across platforms, across ecosystems, is something that will help to illustrate this point for everybody a little bit more easily. But generally, we are creating. We are sort of creating the summoning the storm, as it were, all at once. And so to have a healthy ecosystem of verifiers, we need to ensure that there's enough data for them to rely upon. So where we're seeing this from a Disco perspective is definitely in the Web3 native space, where Web3 native organizations or folks who are working on decentralized technologies in general really want to be able to welcome folks onto their teams who have some competency in the subject matter, because a lot of it, as we know, can be very niche. And so being able to rely upon credentials of achievement from, learning content like Bankless Academy, like SheFi, is becoming, of increasing interest. And so in the context of DAOs, in the context of Web3 education, we found that this is a really great place to start exploring because it is so natively relevant, not only to the content, but also the other organizations. And everybody in that ecosystem already manages their own keys. And so they're in a position to be non-custodial with that data as they are with their financial assets.
Right. Well, see if I heard this right, because this is a theory I've been working on, and I'd be curious your opinion. I see academic credentials now are really brand focused, right? You trust the brand that gives the credential, and then you trust that a credential, even though you don't really know what that person actually did underneath that B-, you still trust that they went and sat there, I guess. I feel like what VCs allow us to do is to almost pass the brand on to, like what you said, the learning matter. Like if I learn from Bankless or I learn from MetaCrafters where I work, if that person has some trust, like that's going to give the credential value. I'm curious if you see other ways to build trust in verifiable credentials, or how we can build trust in these besides, brand focus and more learner focus, if that makes sense.
I totally hear you. And I think we will never move away from the truth that the value of data is signers all the way down. The extent to which we rely on the clear text contents of a credential is wrapped up in the extent to which we trust the signer to be an authority on that subject matter. And outside of that relationship between issuer and contents and expertise, we can also look to the schema, the structure of that credential itself, as almost like its own brand. We can have collaboratively governed schemas defined by a group of preferred signers. So, for example, we can have all of the universities in the NCAA define what a diploma credential means from their entity, and that schema can be governed in a public manner where anybody can see who the preferred signers are and have access to be able to interrogate and resolve it as needed. But I think if we look to the structure of the data then and sort of the governance of the schema itself, that can give us another interface to interpret what a piece of information needs outside of just the signature that it bears.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Like, obviously, if I know that you did everything you need to get the Red Cross CPR certificate, like I'm going to trust you to give me CPR, right? Versus if I trust the person who taught you, that's like another way to kind of have trust in that experience. I like
Definitely.
that. I like that dichotomy a lot. So tell me, let me just take a moment here because I thought I had a really brilliant thought that just went through my brain, but that's okay. We talked about value and we talked about, yeah, let's talk about personal experience because I love how you talk about that at Disco and how it unlocks those. So tell me a little bit about the world once Disco exists and is fully operational and how it changes the way I interact. So how do we kind of connect this digital with physical, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So, Scott, a few years from now, we will be so excited to invite you to a disco at the, let's see, where are we going to go? We're going to go to the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao in Spain. And the only thing that you're going to bring with you when you get off your couch at home is your data backpack. So that's the doors of your building, rideshare, airport security, border screenings, health screenings, all the way to the door of your hotel and then the museum itself and the VIP room, right? Our ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and receive a personalized experience based on the parts of ourselves we choose to share is the future that Disco is building. We're really excited about having responsive environments in all planes of our existence that are attuned to our preferences, almost like having a personal settings page for your entire life, not just a single application or device.
I love that. I love that. And I'd love to dive into the kind of that sharing piece because I know you talk often about privacy and it's such a nice reimagination, I think, of some of the blockchain conversation. So tell me a little bit about how someone might share their information. And then also, sometimes I feel like the value of a credential is because we can see all the people who have it, right? So do we lose something, if I can't email everybody, right? Like email needs us to all be able to connect with one another, even though I can't necessarily find your email. So how do you kind of think about balancing that privacy component versus building value in the network and maybe value in a credential?
So I'm a big enthusiast about selective disclosure. I think being able to elect which parts of yourself to share in which context, but especially to decide how public you want to be with certain traits or accomplishments that you might have, is a very important core element of individualism, our ability to represent ourselves and to change and evolve over time. And so what that necessarily means in the context of credentials is that they're, traits as being private by default or can be issued as private by default and then shared in the whole spectrum of publicity, from known only unto your keys to totally public, published in clear text on the blockchain for all perpetuity. And that range of ways to share data is what we are able to explore when we default to private, but secure data in this form that can be so flexible and yet still independently verifiable at any stage of its life cycle. And so I'm particularly excited about what the world of zero knowledge proofs unlocks for things like predicate disclosure. Our ability to elect to share some parts of our data where others can learn things about that data, but not necessarily see it in clear text. So the sort of classic example that Larry Lessig has been talking about since the late 1990s is being able to go to a bar in the United States and to present your ID, your driver's license, and have the bouncer only know whether you fit the qualifications to enter the establishment and not your home address, your date of birth, your height and eye color.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love this future, and I really want to get there. So tell me a little bit about what are the big pieces that Disco is trying to solve right now. As you kind of roll out, I had a chance to get my own backpack, which was so fun and so smooth. The user experience, I just loved it. So I'm curious, what are kind of the big challenges now that you're the next on the list that you have to solve to really get this product where you want it?
Well, thank you so much, Scott. We're really excited to start welcoming communities on board. And so we're currently looking at all of the different ways that we can make the journey of a community leader even easier using verifiable credentials. So we're currently rolling out the capability of issuing a whole bunch of credentials at once in batches, as well as being able to issue credentials programmatically based on in-app logic or on-chain events. And so just automating some of these processes is going to make everything a lot easier. Additionally, we're really excited to explore some of the key rotation superpowers that decentralized identifiers bring us. So DID documents are the documents associated with DIDs that are public identifiers we can use to sign and manage our credentials, DID documents are kind of like a self-custody link tree, a set of directions for how to interact with my identifier and service endpoints, messaging endpoints, that kind of stuff. And they also allow us to rotate the keys behind a persistent public identifier and get new ones if they become compromised, or if we were in a custodial situation, we want to become non-custodial and be able to drive on our own. So a custodial data backpack, one where you don't necessarily need to manage your own keys in order to start your adventure and to join the party, will allow us to partner with organizations totally outside of the Web3 native space and to welcome even more folks to the dance floor. We see a really great opportunity to broaden the spectrum of what Web3 encompasses by showing people that you don't need to fund your wallet to have fun with your keys. And so if we start off with custodial data backpacks, we upgrade those into non-custodial data backpacks. We allow people to send and receive self-custody digital assets that can do things for them, but don't require any gas fees and can be shared across chains, across Web2 and Web3. We think that's a pretty great way to get the dance floor going.
Yeah, I'd say so. And do you see any big challenges then? I know I asked on Twitter what people would ask you, and a big one that came up was, why is it so hard to get education on board for this thing that seems so obvious for education? So how do you see, is what you just explained how we break into, say, more traditional institutions, or what's kind of the first step into the old school world?
I think we haven't yet been in a position of privilege to offer the complete life cycle of a verifiable credential in a manner that's easy and friendly enough for an institution to use. And so we've seen a number of creative and enthusiastic professors experimenting with things like non-transferable NFTs because the tooling for that is just so much more accessible to them right now. And so because we now have a web app where we can catch and receive those credentials, we've got an API where you can validate those credentials. We're building out an SDK for client-side resolution of credentials, as well as easy in-app issuance. And so I think we are almost there in terms of the basic foundations required to set up a service that's going to be friendly enough for universities. At Disco, we're actually really excited to be experimenting with a number of educational institutions in the higher ed space to do exactly this. And so just having good partners who understand the needs of students and the logistical complexities of universities has been really helpful for us.
That's amazing. And I think I get so excited about that. During my day job, we're working with developers all over the world, and it's hard to get people hired when they don't know what school you went to and if it's real, and if you can speak the language that they want you to. And it's just, there's so many barriers that maybe don't have to be barriers when we can just trust that people have the knowledge that we need them to. And like you said, I think there's so much potential with Web3 companies, for technology companies, because there is so much demand. And so if we can just connect the pieces, the talent with the opportunity, that's where I see Disco really playing an essential role. So this has been so fun, Evan. Thank you so much for making time and for coming on. Any final words or thoughts you'd like to tell the audience in terms of how to get them to learn more and get excited, whether it's about Disco or about the space in general?
Well, it's certainly been an absolute delight to chat with you today about my very favorite subject. And for our listeners, I would welcome you all to share your dreams for the metaverse with me at disco.xyz. You can always find us on Twitter at disco.xyz. You can also find me on Twitter at Proven Authority. And I would remind everyone out there that, the design of the future metaverse is ours to build. And so if we decide that we never want to fill out a form again, we don't have to. And so there's a really exciting, less bureaucratic, much more interoperable, seamless, and personalized future out there. We just have to work together to get it up and running.
That's amazing. Form free in 23. It's the slogan we're going to run on. And I am so thankful that you're working on this future. So Evan, love the work, love the time and the thoughts you brought today. So thanks for coming on the Ed3 podcast, and we will see you in the metaverse.
Absolutely. See you in the metaverse.